Welcome back to Chess Lovers channel. I'm going to continue a discussion on what I believe is the most influential tournament book of all times, and that is the book about the candidate tournament in Neuhausen, Zurich, 1953, written by David Bronstein. And as I mentioned before, this was Ulf Andersson's top choice in his youth, and then we referred to the game Reshevsky-Bronstein, which was one of the games which constituted the King's Indian Revolution. Bronstein is not the only player who has written about this tournament. For example, I have a book written by Miguel Najdorf, and also a book written by Gideon Stolberg, with annotations by Paul Keres as well. There are two other books written by Max Oewe, but you can only find it in the German language, and an English book written by Winter and Hooper. So that is quite amazing. 4 candidates has written about Neuhausen, Zurich, 1953, but I believe that the book by Bronstein is absolutely the top recommendation, because his annotations are superb. Even his preface is fascinating to read. For example, he compares this tournament, candidates tournament, Neuhausen, Zurich, 1953, with other famous tournaments, like for example Hastings 1895, St. Petersburg 1914, New York 1924, Moscow 1935, Groningen 1946. And he believes that Neuhausen, Zurich 1953 can compete with them regarding importance in chess history. And then we should remember that the most influential chess school until around 1920s was Steinitz School, and Siegbert Tarrasch, who wrote a very good book about St. Petersburg 1914, was a very influential commentator these days. So this book changed the view of how chess should be played. But first I will tell you a little bit about my own impressions of this book and David Bronstein. I had the privilege to meet David Bronstein 2 times in my life. The first time was in Gauss on 1990, when I played him and even beat him. And the second time was in the Grandmaster tournament in Wrexham, 1995. And then I remember at one occasion I asked him if he could write an autograph in this book, because this is #1 book written by Bronstein. But he surprised me by telling me that he didn't want to write any autograph. Okay, it didn't matter, because I already have his autographs in the score sheet, both in Russian and in English. So, but nevertheless, he also told me that this book is not so well written regarding the second part. So the first part, he told me, is much better than the second part. Remember, we are dealing with 210 games. There were 15 participants for 30 rounds. So they met each other 2 times. So according to him, the half of the book is really good, and the second half of the book is less good. And this was because the company apparently put a lot of pressure, that they had a deadline, so you had to rush. So that is the inside information I have about this book, which I strongly recommend to study seriously. I even learned the game by heart. It's a game between Taimanov and Bronstein. Taimanov is also a player I had the privilege to meet 3 times actually, 2 draws and 1 loss. This is actually a game I have learned blindfold, learning by heart. So that is my recommendation, that you can choose some influential games. And this is one of the key games which started the Volga Gambit revolution, which took place in the 70s. But Taimanov Bronstein, as well as a game Bronstein-Lundin, and the Swedish grandmaster Erik Lundin, are 2 important key games before the Volga Gambit was popularized. The position I'm going to talk a little bit about, you have behind me, it's between Stålberg and Boleslavsky, and you know Gideon Stålberg is the Swedish grandmaster. He's probably most famous for this book, Chess and Chess Masters, for an international audience. And Stålberg was a very classical player. So in this game you can see that black has a backward pawn on d6, and this is what Bronstein is writing about, that during Tarrasch time the d6 pawn was regarded as a classical weakness. But this tournament changed that kind of thinking. A weakness is only weak if it can be attacked. And as we can see here, is white's move. And if white takes the pawn on d6 now, black will just take the pawn on e4. So the position was like this. And this is what Bronstein is saying, that the knight on d4 is very important to prevent b5, to put pressure on c6. Sometimes it must prevent f5 or bishop e6. So if white wants to attack the d6 pawn, he has to move the knight. And if he moves it to the most natural square, f3, e4 will be a little bit weakened and black can exploit it. So now white, if he wants to continue his pressure on d6, must put the knight on g1. So we can see here the attack does not really succeed. I mean, this is very heavy price just to have the d file opened. So this is one concrete example in the book which impressed me and is also fundamental for the King's Indian Revolution. So by reading this book, especially the first 15 rounds, if we should trust what Bronstein said, and I believe you should do it, then you can concentrate on some key games. I mean, it can be King's Indian games, Sicilian games, or according to your own repertoire. But the main thing is that you get a good feeling of how chess was played during this time. Bronstein talks very much about creativity, because he was very worried that calculation would take over, which you might get the impression today that it has due to the computers. And he even writes in the end that is his fear that the chess game will turn to calculation rather than fantasy, creativity, artistry, and so on. So by reading this book, playing through the games of the 15 best players in the world during this time, this was a tournament won by Smyslov, who later played World Championship matches against Botvinnik after this tournament in the mid-50s. You will learn a lot about how chess was played after Steinitz classical chess. And you will also get a very good picture of the King's Indian opening and the Sicilian opening, and also get a deeper feeling of what constitutes a real weakness. So it's not enough just to look at the pawn structure. You must also have a good feeling for the best places for the pieces, and if it's realistic to be able to win the apparent weakness. And if you find out it's a hard nut to crack, you have understood a little bit more about modern chess. So this is a step after the classical chess and also the hypermodern revolution which took place in the 1920s. And you might say that this is due to the Soviet school, and Alexander Kuto, who was one of the participants in this tournament, he believed in a Soviet chess school. But interestingly, Bronstein also said in his preface that he was not entirely sure it was, and he gave as an example that Petrosyan and Spassky had very different outlooks of how chess should be played. Petrosyan was more of a prophylactic player, and Spassky more of a universal player who strive for the initiative. So this is a matter of opinion. I mean, if you want to call it the Soviet school or not. It should also be mentioned that after this tournament, 1953, a new important player was Michael Tal, and he showed that chess is not a matter of calculation, is rather a matter of fantasy, and that is also what is the problem today, that some people they try to destroy Tal's games by analyzing them with computers, but this is not a human way to play. So this is also a very important perspective to read this book, because then you get a deeper feeling what human art in chess can be, both in many of these games and also by Bronstein's authorship. So if you can tell me a tournament book better than this, I mean better in the perspective that it improves your understanding of chess, please write a comment. So next time I will talk about another tournament book, but I will not tell you right now which book it is. So in the meantime, this is the main focus.